The winter night pressed against the windows like a silent intruder, the world outside a frozen blur of snow and darkness. Inside the old cabin, the soft crackle of the fireplace filled the room with warmth, a golden glow dancing across the wooden walls. The scent of burning pine and the faint aroma of spiced wine mingled, wrapping the room in a cozy, almost intoxicating haze. Clara drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders, settling into the armchair nearest the fire. She could feel the cold that had seeped into her bones from the long walk through the snow, but it was no match for the heat that radiated from the hearth or for the way her heart raced whenever she caught a glimpse of him. Ethan leaned against the mantel, one hand tucked into his coat pocket, the other resting casually on the polished wood. His eyes followed Clara with quiet intensity, dark and unreadable, yet undeniably focused. Every so often, he would glance at the fire, then back at her, as if measuring how close she would let him come. The tension between them hummed in the room, subtle but electric, like a string pulled taut, ready to snap. "You're shivering," he said finally, his voice low, carrying the kind of warmth that made her pulse skip. Clara gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head, refusing to admit how much his nearness affected her. "I'm fine," she murmured, though her fingers instinctively brushed against the edge of the shawl, trying to hold onto something tangible while her thoughts wandered. Ethan stepped closer, and with each movement, the heat from his body brushed against her awareness. He didn't sit, didn't invade her space overtly, but his presence seemed to fill the room, crowding the air in a way that left her breath uneven. "The fire's not enough for you, huh?" he teased lightly, though his tone hinted at something more than mere humor. Clara's lips curved in a hesitant smile. "It's cozy enough," she replied, her voice softer than intended. She looked down at her hands folded neatly in her lap, feeling an odd flutter in her stomach. She had known Ethan for months, their friendship a delicate dance of smiles, shared laughter, and lingering glances, but tonight something had shifted. The snow, the isolation, the golden light, it all felt like a stage set for something inevitable. He tilted his head slightly, watching her with a mix of amusement and something deeper, almost vulnerable. "Cozy, huh? That's one word for it," he said, taking a deliberate step closer. Clara felt the space between them shrink and, against her better judgment, didn't move away. Her pulse quickened, matching the steady crackle of the flames. The firelight flickered across his face, highlighting the line of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes. Clara swallowed, suddenly conscious of how much she wanted to reach out, to close the gap, but hesitant to break the fragile tension that had built so effortlessly. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window, and Clara shivered despite herself. Ethan moved instinctively, draping a thick blanket over her shoulders. The gesture was simple, practical even, yet every brush of his fingers against her skin sent a ripple of warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "Better?" he asked, his lips curling into that small, enigmatic smile that always made her heart stumble. "Much," she admitted softly, though the word felt inadequate to capture the storm of sensations swirling inside her. Her eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment, the world narrowed to the two of them, the crackling fire, and the quiet hum of desire that neither of them dared to name aloud. Ethan leaned back slightly, just enough to give her space, but not enough to escape the gravity of the moment. "It's strange," he murmured, more to himself than to her, "how something as simple as a fire, a blanket, can make the world feel different." Clara nodded, though she didn't speak. Her mind was elsewhere, tangled in the tension, in the warmth, in the quiet pull that drew her closer to him with each passing second. She could feel it, a subtle promise of what might come, simmering just beneath the surface, like the fire that refused to die no matter how cold the night became. And as the flames danced and shadows played along the walls, Clara realized, with a sudden, dizzying clarity, that tonight would change everything. The fire's glow had softened to a lazy, hypnotic flicker, casting long shadows across the room. Clara sipped her wine, trying to keep her hands steady, though every glance at Ethan sent a shiver up her spine. He was near enough that she could smell the faint scent of cedar and leather that clung to him, and it made her pulse quicken. Ethan, meanwhile, seemed completely at ease, lounging in the armchair opposite her with a calmness that only heightened her awareness of him. He tilted his head slightly, watching her with a look that made her cheeks warm. Every movement of his, the way he shifted his weight, the subtle lift of his brow felt deliberate, magnetic, pulling her attention like gravity. "You're quiet tonight," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. His voice was low, casual, yet it carried an undertone that made Clara's stomach flutter. "I'm just enjoying the fire," she murmured, her words betraying her attempt to hide the way her heart raced. She took another sip, pretending to focus on the rich taste of the wine, though her eyes couldn't leave him. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, fingers laced loosely together. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice teasing now, but the warmth in his gaze suggested something more. "Or maybe you're thinking about something, or someone." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. She shook her head slightly, though she didn't deny it. The truth was undeniable, and the tension between them thickened, wrapping around her like the blanket he had draped over her earlier. I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet there was an edge of anticipation she couldn't hide. Ethan smiled, that slow, knowing smile that seemed to strip away the pretense from everything around them. "Oh, I think I do," he said softly, letting the words linger in the air like a delicate promise. He leaned back just enough to glance at the fire, but his eyes never left hers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional whisper of wind against the windows. Clara felt a strange combination of nervousness and exhilaration, her senses heightened by the intimacy of the room. The shadows danced over Ethan's face, softening his features, and she realized how long she had been watching him without realizing it. He shifted again, closing the distance ever so slightly. His hand brushed against the armrest near her, almost accidental, but the contact made her pulse leap. She felt the heat of him not just from the fire, and it sent a jolt of awareness through her body. She didn't move away. Instead, she let the brush linger in her mind, imagining the warmth of his touch in a way that made her breath catch. "You've got something on your mind," Ethan said quietly, leaning a little closer, his voice dropping an octave. "I can see it in your eyes." Clara's lips parted slightly, her tongue searching for words that wouldn't come. She looked away for a moment, catching herself in the reflection of the firelight against the window. The thought of him, so near, so alive, made her pulse race. Ethan tilted his head again, his expression softening. "It's all right," he said, almost tenderly. "You don't have to hide anything from me." The words had a weight she hadn't expected. She swallowed hard, feeling the pull between them tighten, like the air itself had thickened. Her hand, idle on her lap, twitched toward the edge of the blanket again, and she caught herself thinking how warm it would feel if he draped it over both of them. The room seemed smaller suddenly, the space between them charged with anticipation. Clara's gaze met his again, and this time she didn't look away. There was an unspoken agreement, a magnetic draw that neither of them had tried to deny. Ethan's smile deepened, slow and knowing, and he finally spoke in a whisper meant only for her. "Maybe the fire isn't the only thing keeping us warm tonight." Clara's breath caught. Her fingers gripped the edge of the blanket as a shiver ran down her spine, partly from the cold, mostly from the realization of what he meant. The tension had grown from subtle glances and quiet gestures into something undeniable, an unspoken desire that simmered just beneath the surface. For the first time, she felt herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by the magnetism that had been building since they entered the cabin. The fire crackled, shadows danced, and the room held its breath, waiting for the next move in the delicate dance of attraction that had begun, and neither of them could ignore it any longer. The room had grown quieter, though the fire crackled with steady persistence, throwing sparks of golden light across the floor. Clara's heart hammered in her chest, louder than the wind that whispered against the windows. She could feel Ethan's presence like a gravity she couldn't escape, each subtle movement of his body drawing her closer. He leaned just a little farther forward, elbows resting on his knees, his dark eyes fixed on hers. There was a calm certainty about him now, a slow, deliberate confidence that made her pulse accelerate. She wanted to look away, to remind herself of boundaries, but she couldn't. Something inside her urged her to stay, to let the moment stretch, to let the fire between them ignite in ways that went far beyond the hearth. "Clara," he said softly, his voice like velvet, "can I?" He paused, not finishing the sentence, letting the unspoken linger. Her breath hitched, and she found herself shaking her head, though it wasn't denial. The pause, the hesitation, held a promise she didn't need words to understand. She gave a small nod instead, almost imperceptible, her eyes never leaving his. Ethan's hand moved then, slow, deliberate. His fingers brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear. The touch was casual, yet it carried a weight that made her knees weaken. She felt a jolt at the back of her neck, a heat that spread through her chest and into her fingertips. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her racing heartbeat. "You feel warm," he murmured, his lips almost brushing her ear, the words barely audible yet charged with intent. "Warmer than the fire, even." Clara's hand twitched toward his, as if drawn by a force stronger than thought. She felt a shiver ripple down her spine when their fingers met, a light, tentative touch that lingered just long enough to send sparks crawling along her nerves. Her lips parted slightly, her breath shallow, as the firelight reflected in his eyes. They were dark, intense, and filled with something she couldn't name but wanted more than anything. Ethan's other hand moved, resting lightly on the back of the armchair near her shoulder, creating a subtle barrier, a gentle enclosure. It was a touch that suggested protection, intimacy, and desire all at once. Clara felt herself leaning in without thinking, drawn toward him by the invisible pull that had been building since they'd entered the cabin. You make it hard to think," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to betray her emotions. Ethan smiled, slow and knowing, and leaned closer, closing the gap between them by inches that felt monumental. "That's the idea," he said softly, his breath mingling with hers. The warmth of his face, the nearness of his body, made her heart race uncontrollably. The first real touch came then, not bold, but deliberate. His hand found hers again, fingers intertwining, thumb brushing over her knuckles. Clara felt a surge of electricity that made her gasp, the sound small but audible in the stillness of the room. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, searching, and he mirrored her gaze, his expression soft but intense, desire and tenderness tangled together. "You're incredible," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. The words were simple, yet they wrapped around her like a silk ribbon, binding her closer to him without pressure or expectation. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to respond, to speak, to confess the pull she felt, but words failed her. Instead, she let her hand squeeze his, a subtle acknowledgement of the connection sparking between them. Ethan leaned back just slightly, giving her space to breathe, but his hand didn't move. The warmth lingered, and with it, the unspoken promise of more. "I could stay like this all night," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Just, here, with you." Clara tilted her head, a soft smile playing on her lips. I think I'd like that too," she admitted, her voice barely audible, yet carrying the full weight of her desire. The fire crackled, shadows danced on the walls, and the world outside the cabin faded to nothing. In that intimate, golden-lit space, nothing existed but the two of them, their hands intertwined, their glances lingering, and the undeniable pull that had grown from unspoken attraction to physical, electrifying closeness. For the first time, the night felt endless, filled with the kind of anticipation that made every touch, every look, every breath between them feel like a spark waiting to ignite. Clara knew, deep down, that the fire was no longer just in the hearth. It burned between them, slow, fierce, and impossible to ignore. The fire's glow painted the room in shifting shades of amber and gold, flickering across the walls like a living, breathing entity. Clara's fingers remained entwined with Ethan's, and neither of them had moved to break the contact. It wasn't just warmth that lingered between them now, it was the silent acknowledgement of something far more potent, a connection that had grown stronger with every glance, every touch. Ethan leaned back slightly, though his hand stayed in hers. His gaze softened, the intensity easing into something more vulnerable. "You know," he began, his voice quieter than before, "there's something I've been wanting to tell you for a long time." Clara's pulse quickened. She had expected teasing words, maybe playful banter, but the seriousness in his tone caught her off guard. "What is it?" she asked softly, her eyes searching his face for the answer. He took a slow breath, as if gathering courage from the flickering flames. "I've wanted to be close to you, like this, for months," he admitted, his eyes never leaving hers. "Every time we meet, I feel like I'm waiting for something I can't quite name, but I know it's you." Clara's breath hitched, a rush of warmth spreading through her chest. She could feel the truth of his words in the way his hand held hers, firm but gentle. The moment hung between them, heavy with vulnerability and anticipation. "I've felt the same," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "But I didn't know if you, felt it too." His smile was slow, almost reverent, as if her words had unlocked something he'd been holding back. "I did," he murmured. "I just didn't want to push. Not when it could ruin what we already have. But tonight, something about tonight feels different. The snow, the fire, us. I can't ignore it anymore." Clara's heart raced. Every nerve in her body seemed to hum with electricity. She felt drawn to him, pulled by an invisible force that had been growing for months, now undeniable. "Neither can I," she admitted, leaning forward slightly, her forehead brushing against his in a gesture of trust and longing. Ethan's fingers tightened around hers, a subtle yet unmistakable promise. "You're beautiful," he whispered, voice husky, the words carrying both admiration and desire. "Inside and out. And being near you, it's unbearable sometimes, in the best way." A shiver ran through Clara, though not from the cold. She pressed closer, letting their foreheads touch, the warmth of their breath mingling in the golden light. "I've never felt like this before," she said, her voice almost a whisper, yet full of intensity. It's terrifying and wonderful at the same time. Ethan tilted his head, his lips hovering just above hers. Terrifying, yes. But wonderful too, he agreed, his thumb brushing across the back of her hand. That's why it matters. That's why it's real. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in, letting herself feel the depth of the connection that had been growing quietly, steadily, until it could no longer be ignored. When she opened them again, Ethan's gaze held hers with unwavering intensity. There was a silent question in his eyes, a request for permission, a desire to cross the line together into something neither of them had dared explore fully before. She nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, giving him the affirmation he sought. In response, Ethan leaned in, capturing her lips in a soft, tentative kiss. It was gentle, exploratory, a test of boundaries and trust. Clara's hands rose to his shoulders, gripping lightly, as if anchoring herself to the moment. The kiss deepened, the spark of desire igniting like embers catching flame, slow but undeniable. When they finally broke apart, breaths mingling, hearts racing, neither spoke immediately. The silence was filled with unspoken acknowledgement, the understanding that the connection between them had shifted irrevocably. Ethan rested his forehead against hers once more, his lips brushing the side of her face. "I've wanted this," he admitted softly. "Every little moment leading up to this, every glance, every touch, it all meant this." Clara smiled, a mixture of relief, longing, and desire shining in her eyes. "And now," she asked, her voice husky with emotion. "Now," he murmured, his hand tracing the line of her arm, "we see where it takes us." The fire crackled between them, shadows dancing on the walls, and the night outside seemed distant, unimportant. In the golden-lit intimacy of the room, Clara and Ethan discovered the first true understanding of their desire, mutual, undeniable, and ready to explore the depths of what had been simmering for months. For the first time, desire had a voice. The fire had dwindled to glowing embers, but the heat in the room was far from fading. Clara's skin still tingled from their first lingering kiss, and the connection between her and Ethan had grown electric, almost unbearable in its intensity. She could feel it in the press of his hand against hers, in the brush of his shoulder as he leaned closer, in the deliberate way his eyes lingered on her. Ethan traced a finger along her jawline, light and teasing, sending shivers down her spine. "You're irresistible," he murmured, his voice low and husky, carrying the kind of intensity that made her pulse pound in her ears. Clara's breath caught, and she leaned into his touch without thinking, drawn by the gravity of the moment. "I could say the same about you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly with anticipation. I've never wanted someone like this before." He smiled, slow and knowing, the corner of his lips curling with a mix of tenderness and desire. "Good," he said softly, leaning closer so their foreheads touched again. "Because tonight, I'm not letting go." Clara's fingers tangled in the collar of his shirt, and she felt the tension between them coil tighter, like a spring pulled taut. The world outside, the snow, the cold, all seemed to vanish. There was only him, only her, only the heat that built between them with every heartbeat. Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her face, then cupped her cheek, his thumb grazing her lips. Clara's eyes fluttered closed, and she leaned into his hand, feeling both exposed and safe, vulnerable and powerful all at once. His gaze softened, but the hunger in his eyes remained, undeniable. "You feel like fire," he whispered, voice low, almost reverent. "And I can't get enough of it." Clara's lips parted instinctively. Then don't, she breathed, and in that moment, she let go of hesitation, of restraint, of everything that had held her back. She leaned in, capturing his lips again, and the kiss deepened, slow at first, exploratory, then growing in intensity as their desire ignited. His hands moved with gentle insistence, tracing her arms, her shoulders, the curve of her back. Every touch was deliberate, charged with need and reverence, sending tremors of warmth through her body. Clara responded in kind, her hands roaming over the planes of his chest, feeling the solid strength beneath his shirt, the warmth of his skin searing against her palms. They moved closer, bodies aligning as if they had been drawn together by some invisible force. The firelight flickered across their faces, catching the sweat on her forehead, the glint of longing in his eyes. Every glance, every brush of skin, every shallow breath built a tension that seemed to hum in the very air. Ethan's lips left hers for a moment, trailing soft kisses along her jaw, down her neck. Clara shivered, her fingers clutching his shoulders as heat coiled inside her, desperate and delicious. "Ethan," she gasped, voice trembling, body arching toward him. "I know," he whispered against her skin, his voice thick with desire. "I feel it too. Every part of me wants this, wants you." They paused for a heartbeat, just long enough to drink each other in, to feel the gravity of the moment, before closing the distance again. The kiss deepened, more urgent, more demanding, yet still tender, a perfect storm of longing and care. Every movement was a conversation, every touch a confession, every sigh an acknowledgement of the desire that had been simmering for months. Clara rested her hands against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palms. "I'm all in," she whispered, words that were both surrender and invitation. Ethan's hands tightened slightly on her waist, drawing her impossibly close. "And so am I," he breathed, his forehead pressing against hers. "Tonight, it's just us. Nothing else matters." The fire crackled behind them, shadows dancing across the walls, painting them in amber light as they surrendered to the moment. Desire, once simmering, now roared between them, unstoppable, undeniable, and beautiful. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word became a rhythm, a language only they could understand. In the intimacy of the cabin, with the night outside silent and the snow piling against the windows, Clara and Ethan discovered a truth neither of them could deny: passion was not just about fire, it was about trust, about connection, about surrendering to something far greater than themselves. And as their bodies moved together, seeking warmth, seeking closeness, seeking the undeniable pull that had brought them here, they realized that desire, once kindled, could not be contained. The wind howled against the cabin walls, rattling the windows like a wild symphony. Snow whipped past outside, painting the world in a blinding white, isolating them from everything else. Inside, the fire still glowed, but the warmth it gave was secondary to the heat between Clara and Ethan, which seemed to pulse in rhythm with their own racing hearts. Clara's hair fell across her face in loose strands, damp from the dampness of the night outside. Ethan brushed them back with gentle fingers, his touch lingering longer than necessary, sending sparks down her spine. Her body ached in a delicious tension, and every movement he made only drew her closer, closer to the edge of surrender she had never dared to reach before. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, wild, relentless, and impossible to ignore. Ethan's lips traced the line of her neck again, soft and teasing at first, then gradually bolder, as if testing boundaries and daring her to respond. Clara's hands tangled in his hair, holding him to her, pulling him closer with a hunger she had never felt before. "You're breathtaking," Ethan whispered, his breath hot against her skin. "I can't," he paused, swallowing, the weight of his desire evident in every line of his body. "I can't get enough of you." Clara shivered, a mix of cold and desire, and pressed herself closer. "Then don't," she murmured, her lips grazing the side of his face. "Don't ever stop." He responded immediately, his arms wrapping around her, anchoring her against him. The intensity of the moment left no room for hesitation. The world outside might have been frozen and merciless, but inside, their bodies burned with warmth and unspoken promises. Every heartbeat, every touch, every breath between them was a language that neither needed to translate. The snowstorm outside intensified, and the cabin creaked under the weight of the wind. Clara paused, pressing her forehead to Ethan's, their breaths mingling, and realized that the danger, the isolation, and the raw elements only heightened the intimacy of the night. There was no one to interrupt them, no one to see the heat that had grown between them for months. It was a universe built entirely for them, wild and unrestrained. Ethan's lips found hers again, this kiss urgent and hungry, yet laced with tenderness. Clara's fingers traced the contours of his face, memorizing every angle, every line, as if committing him to memory in the firelight. The fire crackled behind them, mirroring the intensity of the storm outside and the storm within them. "You're incredible," Ethan whispered between kisses, voice hoarse. I don't know how I've waited this long." Clara's response was a soft gasp, a mix of longing and affirmation. She pressed herself against him, feeling the solid strength of his body and the fire in his touch. "It doesn't matter now," she murmured. "It's here, it's real, and I want it all." The wind battered the cabin again, rattling the door, sending a shiver down both their spines. Ethan tightened his embrace, almost protective, almost possessive, his lips tracing a path down her collarbone, igniting a trail of fire with every touch. Clara's body responded instinctively, leaning into him, arching toward the sensation that had built for so long. Minutes, or was it hours, passed in a blur of heat, breath, and whispered confessions. Their connection, already electric, became something almost tangible, a force that filled every corner of the room. Every brush of skin, every heartbeat, every soft murmur pulled them deeper into the moment, into each other, into a world that existed solely for them. Finally, they paused, foreheads pressed together, chests heaving in unison, hearts pounding like war drums. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, the cabin felt like a sanctuary, a small universe of warmth and desire that belonged only to them. Clara rested her head against Ethan's shoulder, feeling the steady strength of him beneath her. "I never knew it could feel like this," she whispered, voice trembling, filled with awe and gratitude. Ethan's lips brushed the top of her head. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But now that it does, I don't want it to end. Not tonight. Not ever." The fire crackled, the storm outside moaned and roared, and the night stretched on, timeless, as Clara and Ethan held each other close. Their desire had burned bright and untamed, but now it softened, becoming something deeper, intimate, tender, and unbreakable. In the glow of the embers and the wild snow outside, they discovered that passion wasn't just fire, it was trust, it was surrender, it was the courage to give yourself entirely to someone else. And tonight, that courage had bound them together in a way neither would ever forget. The first light of dawn seeped through the frost-covered windows, softening the fire's glow into a gentle, amber warmth. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside quiet, pristine, and untouched, but inside the cabin, a different kind of stillness lingered, a quiet, satisfied intimacy that only comes after nights of raw, unspoken desire finally realized. Clara stirred, her head resting against Ethan's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. The warmth of his body, the lingering traces of their closeness, and the quiet comfort of the room around them made her feel both safe and electrified, as if every nerve had been rewired by the fire that had consumed them the night before. Ethan stirred as well, his arm curling around her waist, holding her close without speaking. When their eyes met, there was a silent understanding, no need for words, no need for excuses. They had crossed the line together, willingly, tenderly, passionately, and now a calm satisfaction settled over them like a soft blanket. "You stayed," Clara whispered, her lips brushing the bare skin of his chest. Her voice carried awe, gratitude, and a tender affection she had only just begun to articulate. Ethan smiled, soft and quiet, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Always," he murmured, his lips pressing gently against her forehead. "Through the storm, through everything. I'm here." She traced a finger along his arm, savoring the lingering warmth and the comforting solidity of him. "I didn't want it to end," she admitted, voice trembling with emotion. "Last night, it felt like everything shifted. Like we found something we've been searching for all along." Ethan's gaze softened, eyes dark with emotion as he leaned closer, brushing his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle, lingering, and full of quiet reassurance. "It doesn't have to end," he said softly, voice low and deliberate. "Not tonight, not ever. What we have, it's ours. And I want it to grow, slowly, fully, without fear." Clara smiled against him, feeling tears prick the corners of her eyes. It wasn't just desire or passion anymore, it was something deeper, an unspoken bond forged in fire and trust, in vulnerability and surrender. She had felt it building for months, a pull that neither of them could resist, and now it had settled into a quiet certainty that warmed her more than any fire ever could. They rose together slowly, bodies still touching, lingering, reluctant to let the other go. Ethan draped a blanket over both their shoulders, the simple act both protective and intimate. Outside, the sun rose, casting pale gold light over the snow, transforming the landscape into a dazzling winter wonderland. But inside, in the small warmth of the cabin, time felt suspended, and Clara and Ethan moved in a quiet rhythm, attuned to one another's presence. "I never imagined this," Clara murmured, glancing around the room as if seeing it anew. "I thought desire was fleeting, and dangerous. But, this what we have, it's more than that. It's steady, alive, and real." Ethan held her face in his hands, eyes intense, unwavering. "Real," he repeated. "And it will stay that way, as long as we choose it. I want every morning like this with you, and every night after. The fire isn't just in the hearth, Clara, it's in us." She leaned into him, her lips brushing his once more, soft and tender, carrying both affection and the memory of the passion that had burned so brightly the night before. "Then let it stay," she whispered, "let it be ours." For a long moment, they simply held one another, allowing the stillness to settle, letting the quiet intimacy speak louder than words ever could. The cabin smelled faintly of burning pine, lingering wine, and the warmth of two bodies who had surrendered to their desire and found something lasting on the other side. Outside, the snow sparkled in the new sunlight, untouched and pure, a mirror of the new chapter that had begun inside. Clara and Ethan moved closer again, sharing soft kisses, gentle touches, and laughter that felt like music, a testament to the comfort and joy they had discovered together. And as the morning stretched on, the fire's embers glowing faintly in the hearth, Clara realized that desire had not only drawn them together, it had built something enduring, a bond of trust, intimacy, and love that neither the cold outside nor the storms of life could ever extinguish. In the glow of the new day, with hearts still racing but steadied by their closeness, Clara and Ethan found not just the thrill of passion, but the quiet certainty of connection. They had discovered that desire, when shared with the right person, could ignite more than fire, it could ignite a lifetime. And in the warmth of the cabin, by the lingering glow of the hearth, they both knew, this was only the beginning.